The trailer for the Duggar documentary just dropped, and here's why you should watch it, even if you never watched the show, especially if you're in the USA. You might know the Duggars from their TLC reality show 19 Kids and Counting, which at one point was 18 Kids and Counting and 17 Kids and Counting. It all started as a two-part series, 14 Kids and Counting. The show positions them as this very wholesome, family values-based group of modest weirdos who don't kiss till their wedding day, but they just love the Lord and each other. Here's what you might not know. The Duggars are a part of an extremist right-wing conservative Christian group called the IBLP, the Institute for Basic Life Principles, founded by cult leader and sexual predator Bill Gothard. This is what the documentary is going to deep dive into. What matters for us as we look at this through the lens of the age of the personal brand is knowing that the IBLP's goal was to mainstream their extremist beliefs, to get more widespread adoption and or at least tolerance for their extremist beliefs so that they could arrest more and more political control. And one of the main ways that they did this was by getting some of their most prominent families in the media to soften America's perception of them and to position them as wholesome family values people instead of folks essentially who want us to live in the Handmaid's Tale. Speaking of politics, you can actually see that this photo was either taken while Jim Bob Duggar was on the campaign trail or actively serving in the Arkansas House of Representatives. So this approach by the IBLP was working for a while. Jim Bob Duggar had a political career. Josh Duggar had a political career. Jed Duggar tried to have a political career, thus far has failed. But the IBLP was starting to succeed. The IBLP wasn't just successful at getting its leaders into political office, they were successful in getting their ideas into the politics and the public life of pretty much every state in the country by creating a secular version of their training materials and having them be adopted by public schools, government buildings, police forces. It goes on and on. It's called the Character Training Institute, and their materials are still in use today all across the USA and governments across the world. So in a nutshell, Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar and each of their 19 brands and counting were tasked by the IBLP with softening America's views on their extreme religious beliefs so that they could get more political control to enforce those religious beliefs on the rest of America. And I think it's notable that the word propaganda, if you remember, literally originated in the church, and it means to propagate the faith, which is exactly what the Duggars set out to do. So you might be thinking, if the Duggars were a PR vehicle for the IBLP to gain more political control to enforce their extreme religious beliefs on the country, but now eldest son Josh Duggar has been arrested, convicted, and imprisoned for various sexual crimes, and the Duggars defamed, well, the threat is over, right? Not quite. I wish I could say this is where the roller coaster ends, but here is another prominent IBLP family. Gil Bates, featured here is IBLP leadership. They also had a TLC reality show for one season, The United States of Bates. And then they were on Up TV with Bringing Up Bates until last year, when some speculate that they were canceled because multiple members of the Bates family were seen at the January 6th insurrection. Speaking of the insurrection, this is Lawson Bates, who absolutely was there on January 6th. It was all over his Instagram stories, but still manages to pull off sponsorships from People magazine. What's notable about this is that most of the Duggar and Bates adult children have transitioned to becoming influencers now that they're no longer on TV. Here's just a few more examples of Bates kids in the media recently, and there's 16 more where that came from. And what's troubling about this is, remember, the IBLP's goal was to gain more mainstream acceptance for their extreme religious views so they could politically enforce those views on the nation. But they've traded their kind of almost performatively modest garb of the 90s for influencer garb. Now you know why this matters. We've got propaganda, purity culture, politics in the age of the personal brand. We've got the same folks who were at the January 6th insurrection on the cover of People magazine as emblems of the all-American family. The same audience that had a voracious appetite for the Duggars and the Bates is the audience that resonated with the idea of making America great again. These are the folks that are going out to vote for the lawmakers that are stripping reproductive rights, that are trying to end no-fault divorces, ripping trans kids away from their parents in Florida. And obviously it goes on and on. Folks are not just getting radicalized by Fox News. You can be radicalized by 19 Kids and Counting. Last thought. Why do these families have so many kids, you might be asking yourself? Well, the IBLP embraces the Quiverful ideology, which is the concept that you should leave the size of your family up to God, no contraception, no natural family planning, and that each child is an arrow in God's quiver. So they essentially liken having more babies to fighting a holy war on God's behalf. This might seem harmless, but it becomes extremely dangerous and destructive when you pair it with the IBLP's other teachings, like women shouldn't dress so as to be a stumbling block or to defraud their brothers in Christ, or the idea that women are expected to always be joyfully available, as Michelle Duggar is famous for saying, because anyone can make him a sandwich, but only you can satisfy him in that one special way. You can see how this has led to a culture of covering up sexual abuse, of perpetuating rape culture, which is what purity culture is essentially another name for. Shiny Happy People comes out on June 2nd, and I'm really hoping that the filmmakers don't position this as a Duggar-only problem. Because if you remember from part 1, the IBLP has successfully gotten the secular versions of its trainings and teachings into public schools, government buildings, police forces, various political bodies across the country and the world. And I think that we're living in the consequences of a country being radicalized not just by Fox News, but by 19 Kids and Counting.